book show in much, where talk to
You do what?
A book show.
Oh.
Talk to different people about fave books that you've read and how it's inspired you, or what you learned from it, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have a book that that comes back to you every once in a while?
Yeah, well, I've read Perfume by Patrick Susskind about 10 times in my life, and I can't stop reading it. It's like something that's just stationary in my pocket all the time. It just doesn't leave me, and every time I'm bored, like I'm on an airplane or something, I read it over and over again. Because I'm a hypochondriac, and it just affects me. It makes me want to cut my nose off.
What's it about?
It's about this perfume apprentice in France at the turn of the century, and he is just disgusted basically with all humans, and he just can't get away from humans. So he goes on this trek, this walk of death, where he goes into the rural areas where there's woods all over the place in the small villages, and he only travels by night. And he just, every time he smells human, like a fire from a far off way, he'll just get really disgusted and hide, and he just tries to stay away from people. I can relate to that.
Do you ever use what you read in any of your songs?
As a matter of fact, I use that very story in Scentless Apprentice. Yeah. So that's really one of the first times that I've ever used an actual story, as a book, as an example of a song. I've always tried to stay away from that, but now that I'm running out of ideas more and more, I tend to do that.
Is it hard when you spend your whole life doing the first few albums, and then suddenly everybody needs your attention? You have to do interviews, you have to travel around, and suddenly is it hard to come up with ideas?
I don't know. I've just noticed that people expect more of a thematic angle with our music. They always want to read into it. And before, I was just using pieces of poetry and just garbage, just stuff that just would spew out of me at the time. And a lot of times when I write lyrics, it's just at the last second because I'm really lazy. So, and then I find myself having to come up with explanations for it. So I thought I'd prevent that this time and actually have an explanation for some of the songs at least.
There's a lot of baby references in all the songs. I didn't think there would be, but you have like wombs, babies, baby's breath, baby throw up, baby
throw up?
Baby, there's baby everywhere. Lying. This is obviously from a huge part of your life.
It has been a part of my life before Courtney was even pregnant, though. I've always been just fascinated with medical texts and charts, and I guess I secretly want to be a doctor or something. I don't know, or a person that works in a cremation factory. I don't know. I've always liked anatomy. Ever since I was a little kid. When I first got that little model of the Invisible Man, or the Visible Man, it's just something that I like. And since I've become a big rock star and made a bunch of money, I found this place in the Mall of America in Minneapolis that sells nothing but medical stuff. It's a medical supply store that they've offered to the public. It's really great. I bought all these fetuses and anatomy men and charts and stuff. And it was like a dream come true. Because I've always been really poor, and if I could find something like that in a second-hand store, I'd barely have enough money to buy it. And a lot of times I couldn't buy that stuff, so I just went on this rampage of buying all this stuff. And I think I've overused it, for like pictures for the album. I don't know. I just went overboard on it.
The old saying that you can't buy happiness. Do you think that's true?
Well, yeah, you can't buy happiness. I mean, that made me happy for a little while. But, I mean, I was just probably almost just as happy with, I don't know, I look back on going to secondhand stores and stuff like that and finding a little treasure like that. And that actually meant more to me because it was more of a stab in the dark in a way, because you didn't know if you're going to be able to afford it, and you don't know what you're really looking for, and when you find it, it's more special to you rather than having $1,000 and going into a store like that and just buying the whole store. It's not as special.
guys have achieved so much success, I mean, so quickly, so surprisingly. You've had a baby, you're married. What excites you now?
My baby, my marriage. I don't know. I still like playing too. I mean, Chris and Dave and I haven't changed at all. I mean, believe it or not, we get along just as well as we ever did. You know, we're just as the same passive-aggressive people as we used to be. You know, we never fight. And when we're pissed off at each other, we just hold it under our breath and have respect for one another in that way. You know, it's easier to work that way. You know, because we have a mission, I guess.
How do you personally cope with having relationships, private relationships that are always being scrutinized publicly? It must be really difficult.
Well, it is, but I mean, I still have a lot of the same friends that I used to have, so they don't seem to mind, and that isn't ever really exposed too much. You know, no one writes about how me and my
It's a hangover day for everybody. I think it's fair to say. Or
hangover. It's actually a pretty serene day.
Yeah. It feels like a quiet South by. We were talking about that.
It's empty. Quiet is an understatement.
I was being nice. I was being diplomatic.
Okay.
Kind of like.
Partly the rain.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's kind of suck.
Well, why'd you come this year?
Because I gotta come, I guess. I don't know if that's like confirmed. I just assume I like have to come.
Why?
To hold up my end of the bargain, because we definitely had it going up yesterday. Like, I had a couple of real good shows yesterday.
So that's good. So you can say people were. It wasn't empty where you were.
No.
How'd it feel?
It was good, man. It feels the best like this time around, just because like I'm like okay with being like more self-centered now.
Mm-hmm.
So like, and not in like a detrimental way, but just enough to where it's healthy and where I'm not like ignoring what I need, like the team around me and like almonds. So I'm like,
You gotta fuel, you gotta hydrate.
Yeah.
You know that's important now.
Yeah, I'm on my health.
Yeah. So what else happened this week? What has transpired? What are your feelings about it?
Just had a disconnect with the release of with the rollout of everything. Just from probably a combination between like my initial me initially being apprehensive to like talking to anyone from the label while I'm like working.
Yeah.
Because I would rather just like finish the package and then present it like now like, with instructions. So it's what I did just because of how fucking difficult the last one was. Like, it was my first one, so it was just like pulling the song that I recorded when I first got back, one for like a year and a half later, as opposed to just like consolidating, having it be like a photograph of like one moment, and like put this photograph up for me this way. And then, so my whole thing with everyone was like, this is gonna be as important as we treat it. Because it rings true all the way around, like from 3 Skies to like Kanye. Like however important you treat yourself, however you're gonna treat you. So if there's like a disconnect between me and mine, like then I'm gonna be disconnected from it. You know what I mean? So when I put it up, it's gonna be less genuine. If people see it come up from like something like Vivo, or like, you know what I mean? Just something that's more of an interview than a person that people like got attached to, then it's gross and it like puts people off. Ultimately, it's a lose-lose for everyone, not just for me. Like I'm not just a diva that's up here like complaining about how dirty they did me, because we like collectively suffer from looking, instead of it being about let's talk about this video, Or let's talk about this album release. It's now back to a hype machine, which is that Earl Sweatshirt is mad at the label. Like everyone's like, whoa. And it was what I was trying to avoid. Like I was trying to come back on my Phoenix out the ashes, like completely anew. Like let's just talk about content and nothing surrounding it. But so we back in the hype thing.
So did the disconnect occur? Well, I guess it doesn't matter where it occurred.
Just with the launch, I wanted the video to go up first, so that, because it would have been out of complete nowhere. Like the video with the song would have been enough to digest. The title of the album's at the end of the video. I presume that the consumer is smart enough to put two and two together. Like, that's not that crazy. So we don't need, my whole thing was we don't need to shove it down their throats. Like, because the initial thing that they had for me, like the layout for the website, this is where the complication happened. We were gonna put the video on a website, like the Earl Sweatshirt website. Real simple video on the thing. But when it came to me, it had a bunch of banners on it. Like, download the new album. Like, more than you see on dudes who are bigger than me. Like, you know, like what? So I was like, well, take the banners off, we'll launch the thing. So I'm sitting there waiting. I'll check my Twitter. And then this kid that's like a
Psycho is ridiculous. It's farcical on many levels. The book is ridiculous, brilliant, but ridiculous, as is the script, and that's what we intend. It's very funny, and I had no idea that it was funny when I first received the script. All that I knew of it was the excerpts that I had seen in newspapers, which generally had chosen the most grisly scenes. And so I assumed, like I think most people do, that it was some sort of a dark psychological analysis of a serial killer. And when I received the script, thinking that, I wasn't that excited about it, really. Then I read it and found it hilarious. Called up Mary and just said to her, listen, I'm not sure if we should talk about this because I find this really funny. Obviously, she said, of course it is, and that's great. And we found that we agreed completely on how it should be done and that there was a satirical element in it. And that really is what has been focused on in this script. There are obviously, whilst it is funny, it is a black comedy, and this is an extreme black comedy. There are scenes of extreme brutality and ugliness in it, and you know we've kept those in because it's a whole part of the story. We'd be getting cold feet if we decided to omit any of that. But the primary thing is the satire that Mary has focused on, and therefore I think a lot of people really don't know, have no idea really what kind of film we're making here. It's set in the late '80s. In New York. It's focusing very much on the era and the greed, the materialism, the incredible amounts of money that was going through Wall Street, and still is, but at that time, whereas I went and hung out with a lot of Wall Street people in New York before doing this, and whereas a lot of them said that they're actually making more money now than they did in the 80s. In the late 80s, they were like rock stars. In the midst of that is Patrick Bateman, who is a 26-year-old guy in mergers and acquisitions. Nothing is really known about Bateman's past. It's referred to in that he goes to Harvard, in that he obviously comes from money. He probably grew up on the Upper East Side. Summered in the Hamptons, you know, was a wealthy.
So I was so desperate to prove my parents wrong, like I can get a job. So I got a job selling hot dogs. And It wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. They had the catch of it was that it was right next to my university, like across the street of my university. But it was sort of like the odd street of it, so it wasn't like super popular. But every once in a while, someone from my class, which I clearly didn't even know, but they knew who I was, saw me there, and it was like, "Oh, you're here now. Cool." The school were literally like anyone that finished it will become like a boss or whatever, and then there's me in the hot dog stand. That wasn't vengeful or spiteful, no. Funny enough, my old teacher came once. My old teacher, and he pretended that he didn't know it was me. Yeah, and I was like, dude, I'm not embarrassed. Come on. But no, he pretended he didn't know me. I guess he thought it was so embarrassing. A bit cringy. And
I guess he didn't expect to see you there.
Yeah.
Did he believe in you? Did he think you were going to go far?
No, I don't think so. He was a good teacher. Fuck off.
Did you get to a point where you could think you could maybe eat another hot dogs?
No, I made great hot dogs.
What's the secret to that great food?
Well, actually, I just made hamburgers. We sold hamburgers as well. Well, what we did with the hot dogs, because the guy that worked there was so cheap, or that's not right. He was resourceful. So he was like, "Don't cook the hot dogs, because if we make too many, we're gonna have to throw them away. So just microwave them, dip them in the water, and people don't know the difference." Yeah, it was pretty gross.
And that's what you did.
Yeah, he told me to do it. Am I guilty here?
Have you ever been back to the hot dog stand?
No, but I really should visit it again. It was funny because like the boss in the harbor hated me. She hated me. She was so nice to everyone, like high-fiving them, and I was like, but this guy really liked me because I was yeah, clearly I dipped the fucking thing. I did it.
You must have saved him a lot of money.
Yeah, especially on the scarce napkin control that I did as well, not give out too many. But yeah, no, he really liked me, so I honestly, even though the job was shit, the fact that I had a great boss was pretty good actually. And he would follow my YouTube thing as well, and like I showed it to him, and he's like, "Whoa, that's really cool. There's some money in there." And I'm like, "Yeah, if people get big, they can make a lot of money." And he's like, "Oh, that's really cool." And I was like, "Yeah," because that was clearly my dream at that point, for it to grow so I can make a living out of it. And then, boom, I got my contract with the network. So I made no money in a year making YouTube videos to a great amount of money in one, second, essentially, because no ads, and then I had ads on my videos. So I was like, well, goodbye. I remember, man, this is terrible. I shouldn't be saying this, but I never told him I was quitting because I felt so bad about it. So, and I was supposed to meet _𝐟𝐸𝐸, so I was flying to _𝐟𝐸𝐸 the next day, and I had just dropped off the keys. And then I was landing in Amsterdam in between, and I checked my phone, and he had called me like 10 times. And I was like, oh, I'll have to call him. And then he was crying about the fact that I had quit, and it was so sad. Yeah, I'm sorry if you're... I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but we made some great hot dogs together.
So, in that moment when you were talking to him about it being there being a future in it, like, what was the moment where you realized there might be a future in it?
For me, the moment I realized, well, I always dreamed big with YouTube. Like, I really thought maybe, there's a chance, even though how stupid it was, because it was so unlikely. But I think even when I just started, it was really weird because a lot of people, of my friends and friends that I met through YouTube, they treated me like I was a big shot on YouTube even before I had like 100 subs or whatever. I don't know. I think people believe that I had a voice that was different, and people felt like this guy's gonna get big someday. So people treated me like I'm something special, but really I was like 100 subs, like shit. But I felt that vibe since the beginning. I really did. So I felt like I had a lot to give, and I was ready for it. When I got 100 subs, it was because well, I had like 30 subs before that. And then someone put me in their sub box, which back then was like a big deal, because then anyone that's subbed to them will automatically sub to your sub box. So it was a great way to get subscribers that don't give a shit about you, but you get the number. So all of a sudden, overnight, I got 100 subs, and I was like, oh shit, I'm gonna be the biggest YouTuber. So that was crazy. I remember 100 subs was like the biggest deal. That was probably one of my biggest milestones, just getting 100.
And did it change at all the kind of way you approach making a video?
What?
Well, like before you were saying that you were making videos without any idea who you were talking to.
Yeah.
But now you have a defined idea of
I still didn't know, like, yeah, I had a couple people watching me, but I didn't feel like I had an audience yet, I would say. It was more like trying to grab people across everywhere, as many people as I can, just to have an audience, but I didn't feel like I had it yet, no. I didn't do the, hey, how's it going, bros, or anything like that, but just the bros became my audience. I think that's when it started.
And when did you start to, like, what is the story behind the key pieces of it? Like, this is the book that crystallized?
Whatever we want.
John Lennon was walking down the street on the west side of New York last night between 10 and 11 o'clock Eastern Time. He was shot down by an assailant who is dead tonight in a senseless, terrible moment. The interview that you just saw, the portion of that interview, was first recorded here in New York at the NBC studios during April of 1975. And to this day, the John Lennon Show, as it is called in the Tomorrow series, is still one of the most often requested programs for repeat purposes. And we're going to run the entire interview tonight, not because it's a terrific interview or it's terribly entertaining or enlightening. It is, after all, 5 years old, but curiously, it turns out that possibly this interview is the last television interview that John Lennon ever did. It contains no historic information, nothing terribly new, but after all, it is a little bit of stuff and substance of a man who was part of a change, a revolution, if you will, in popular music back during the 1960s. And during the 1970s, John Lennon found a new lifestyle for himself, which he will discuss during this interview. A bit later on, we have Lisa Robinson, who did one of the last interviews with John Lennon, which will appear in the New York Times syndication service later on, and Mr. Jack Douglas, who produced John and Yoko Ono's current album, Double Fantasy, who was with John and Yoko shortly before his tragic death in New York last night. We'll be right back to run the 1975 interview with John Lennon after these announcements, so I hope that you'll all stay with us. We'll be back in about 2 minutes. Promised, here is John Lennon, and a little bit later on in the program we'll talk about the possibility of his having to leave the United States, and at that time his attorney, Mr. Leon Wilds, will join us to make certain that John or I make no mistakes in the legalities. But I welcome you here, and I'm glad that you're here. As I said at the outset, back in 1964, after the cataclysmic arrival of the Beatles here in the United States and the great popularity you had on the Ed Sullivan program and others, there were many people who did not really understand what you were doing, and they thought then that your hair was long and that you looked modish, you know, and you were revolutionary. Does it surprise you at all that it took so many of us such a long time to get into your act and to realize what you were doing?
No, it was mainly parents, and they were against rock and roll, you know. Anyway, before the Beatles came along, I mean, people have been trying to stamp out rock and roll since it started.
Why do you think that is? What are they afraid of?
I always thought it was because it came from black music, and the words had a lot of double entendre in the early days. And it was sort of, you know, the white kids, our white, nice wasps are going to go crazy with all this moving their bodies. You know, the music got to your body, and the Beatles just carried it a bit further, made it a little more white even than Elvis did, because we were English, you know. And people couldn't hear it. That's why they didn't understand
Well,
it.
that
They
brings
couldn't
up an
hear it,
interesting point. You know, one could never understand the words until one sat down with the record album. I went to a couple of your personal appearances, including one I think in Philadelphia in 1965 in an outdoor location.
Oh, yeah.
And there was so much screaming and so much carrying on. And did that bother you at all when you were doing those concerts? That people couldn't hear your music, that all they heard was themselves screaming?
It got a little boring. I mean, it was great when it first happened. When you'd come on, there'd just be nothing but wah, you know. But then we just became like lip syncing, you know, miming, and sometimes things would break down and nobody'd know. And so it wasn't doing the music any good, you know.
When you guys were in the dressing rooms after these concerts, or when you were in the dressing room after the Ed Sullivan Show, where, my heavens, young people were just almost flinging themselves on stage, didn't you ever wonder, are these people crazy? Are we that good? Can we really produce this kind of reaction in people?
We didn't think whether we're that good or not. You've got to think you're good to do what we did, you know. It was like being in the eye of a hurricane, and so there was never a time when you thought what's going on, and that was about as deep as it got. What is happening, or what, you know, you'd suddenly wake up in the middle of a concert or a happening, and think, what, how did I get here, you know?
Mm-hmm.
The last thing I remember was playing music in a club, and the next minute this. But we never thought about it too much because it was an ongoing thing. It was happening to us, and it was hard to see. You know, we were just in the middle, being ushered from room to room.
As I recall, there were fan clubs or clubs of followers formed for each of the individuals in the organization.
Well, it was mainly a Beatle club, but you know, they sort of fanned it out a little just to keep the...
And I'm just wondering how unified any group can be. And I'm not singling out the group that you belong to, the Beatles, but how unified can any group be when the audience has certain favorites? Maybe they like Paul more than they like John, or something like that. And I wonder, I got right to it, didn't I? Yeah. I just wondered if it's awfully difficult to be friends, and do you really care about whether or not you're friends when you are a group such as the Beatles, or whether you're the Rolling Stones or whoever?
We didn't break up because we weren't friends. We just broke up out of sheer boredom, you know. And boredom creates tension.
How can you get bored doing what you did?
Because it was going on, it was not going anywhere, you know. We'd stop touring, and we'd just sort of say, time to make an album, you know, go in the studio, and the same four of us would be looking at each other and playing the same licks.
And those silly haircuts, yeah.
Those silly haircuts that you have now. You see, notice he's got his now. And we were very good friends, and we've known each other since